They called her damaged goods, a scandal, a liar, a woman no decent family would ever hire again. She believed them, until one man, a scarred and silent rancher in Montana, wrote back and said, "I don't give a hill of beans about your reputation. Come if that suits you." That single sentence crossed 2,000 miles and changed everything. Here on this channel, we celebrate the spirit of the West in all its forms: rugged love, fierce mothers, wounded hearts that find their way home, and the simple, powerful truth that kindness can rebuild what cruelty destroys. This story is proof of one beautiful thing. Somewhere in this world, there is someone who will see exactly who you are and love you fiercely for it. Like this video, if Ruth Ann's story moved you. Share it with someone who's been told they're not enough. Leave your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. And subscribe, because every story on this channel is one worth carrying with you.
"You the mail-order bride?" Ruth Ann spun around. A leathery-looking man in a work apron stood about 3 feet away, his arms crossed, sizing her up like a prize hog. "I'm Ruth Ann Brennan. I'm here to meet Mr. Samuel Hartwell." "Hartwell?" The blacksmith spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't seen hide nor hair of him today." But he knew I was arriving. "Don't mean a hill of beans out here. Mail runs slow, horses go lame, men change their minds." He just shrugged. "You might be waiting a spell, miss." A rock settled in the pit of Ruth Ann's stomach, but she kept her face as still as a pond on a calm day. 10 years as a housekeeper had taught her that much. You never let 'em see you're scared. "Then I suppose I'll wait." She found herself a bench outside the general store, sat down, and folded her hands neatly in her lap so nobody could see them tremble. That July sun was beating down something fierce. Her dress was soaked clear through with sweat in just a few minutes. All she could hear were the grasshoppers chirping in the dry fields past the edge of town. Even the shade felt like sitting in a cook stove. A woman stepped out of the store, stopped, and just stared. "You're the one from back east." "Yes, ma'am. I'm answering Mr. Sam Hartwell's advertisement." "That's what I figured." The woman's lips drew into a thin line. "You're either brave or desperate, girl." Ruth Ann looked her square in the eye. "Maybe a little bit of both." Something changed in the woman's expression. It wasn't quite approval, but maybe she saw a piece of herself. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. My husband and I own this store." She paused for a moment. "If Hartwell doesn't show up, you come on inside. I'm not about to let you bake to death on my porch." "Much obliged, ma'am." Margaret went back inside, and Ruth Ann was alone again. 1 hour crawled by, then another. The sun climbed even higher in the sky. Her throat felt like sandpaper. The few coins she had left wouldn't get her through the week. If Samuel Hartwell didn't show, no, don't you dare think about that. She'd made it through Boston. She would make it through this. But that fear kept creeping up on her, pulling up memories she had tried so hard to bury. The pantry, Mr. Charles Whitmore's hands, the heft of that skillet right before she swung it, the blood on his forehead, and his mother's voice, cold as a winter morning. "The Irish girl assaulted my son." Not a single person had believed Ruth Ann. Not the other servants, not the constable, not one person in all of Boston society. Damaged goods. That's what they had called her. Damaged goods that no respectable family would ever dream of hiring. She had poured her heart out in 7 letters to 7 complete strangers, laying out the truth with painful honesty. 32 years old, plain-faced, a sharp tongue, and carrying a reputation that would make proper ladies faint. Only one man had bothered to write back: Samuel Hartwell. "Miss Brennan, I don't give a damn about your reputation. I need a woman who can work hard and speak her mind. Come on out if you're willing." So she'd come. She sold everything she owned, crossed half the country fueled by nothing but hope and desperation. And he wasn't even here. Ruth Ann Brennan. The voice that spoke her name was deep and rough, like stones tumbling over each other. Ruth Ann got to her feet and turned around slowly. He was a tall man with shoulders as broad as a barn door. His face was weathered like an old saddle, with deep lines etched around gray eyes that looked like they'd seen more than their share of trouble. A long scar ran from his shoulder down into his collar. His dark hair had touches of gray, and his jaw was set like he meant business. He wasn't handsome. He was something else altogether. Mr. Hartwell. Sam. He didn't even offer to shake her hand. My horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back. Had to walk. That's a long walk in this kind of heat. I've had worse. His eyes scanned her face, but he wasn't judging her looks. He was looking for something else. You're smaller than I pictured. I'm stronger than I look. You'd have to be. He bent down and picked up her traveling bag. The wagon's round back. We can talk on the way. He started walking without even checking to see if she was coming. Ruth Ann stood there for just a second. She could feel Margaret Sullivan watching from the store window. She could feel the eyes of the whole town on the mail-order bride and the solitary rancher. Then she lifted her chin and followed him. The wagon clattered its way north through nothing but wide-open country. Mountains stood tall in the distance. The grass stretched on forever in every direction, brown and crispy under the summer sun. Sam drove without saying a word. A whole mile went by before he finally spoke. I ain't much for talking. I noticed. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. You always this blunt? It saves time. Fair enough. He flicked the reins. Your letter mentioned you ran into some trouble back in Boston. Said something about a reputation. Ruth Ann's hands clenched in her lap. Are you asking me to explain myself? I'm asking if it's going to follow you all the way out here. The truth or the lie? Both. She took a deep breath. She had promised herself she would be honest. If he was going to send her packing, it was better to get it over with now. The truth is, I was a housekeeper for a rich family. The son cornered me one night. He tried to have his way with me. Her voice was flat and steady, the only way she could get the words out. I hit him with a skillet. It left a scar. Sam's face didn't change one bit. And the lie? That I tried to seduce him. That I attacked him when he turned me down. She paused. That's the story his mother told. And that's the story all of Boston chose to believe. Silence. The wagon wheels creaked. The horses plodded along. Ruth Ann braced herself for the rejection. You still got it? She blinked at him. What? The skillet. You still got it? No, Mrs. Whitmore kept it. Sam nodded slowly. That's a shame. A woman who can swing cast iron like that would be mighty handy come branding time. Ruth Ann just stared at him. You believe me? You crossed 2,000 miles on nothing but a hope and a prayer. Figured if you were the type to chase after men, you'd have found a much easier road to travel. His gray eyes met hers, level and impossible to read. I know what it looks like when a person's running from something that wasn't their fault. How? The war. The word landed flat between them. I fought 4 years for the Union. Lost my brother at Antietam. He stopped for a moment. Came out west after that. Built this ranch. I lost my wife 5 years back. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. They rode on without talking for another mile. The heat was a heavy blanket. Sweat trickled down Ruth Ann's back. Can I ask you something? She finally said. Go ahead. Why me? You must have gotten other letters. From women without scandals, without all these complications. Sam's jaw got tight. I got plenty. Most of them wanted to know how big the house was, how many head of cattle I owned, if I could give them a comfortable life. They weren't asking the right questions. They weren't honest questions. He glanced over at her. Your letter was different. You didn't ask what I could give you. You told me what you could offer. Hard work, loyalty, and honesty. That seemed a whole lot more important than the size of my parlor. His voice got a little lower. I've had my fill of pretending to last a lifetime. I'll take real, even if it's messy. Something inside Ruth Ann's chest started to shift. Something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was hope, and it was dangerous and terrifying. But I should warn you, she said. I'm not an easy woman to live with. I speak my mind. I've got a temper, and my sense of humor has been called unladylike. Sounds to me like you'll fit right in. And I don't know the first thing about ranching. The only livestock I've ever been around are chickens. You'll learn. What if I'm hopeless at it? Sam turned and gave her a long, hard look. There was something in those gray eyes that made her forget how to breathe. You crossed half the country by yourself to marry a stranger because you refused to let a lie be the end of your story. He let that sink in. You ain't hopeless at anything, Ruth Ann. You just haven't found the right place to prove it yet. The words hit her like a warm summer rain. She had to look away fast and blink a few times. That's a mighty generous thing to say about a woman you just met. It ain't generous. It's just what I see. And they came over the top of a ridge, and Ruth Ann saw the ranch for the first time. It was a solid-looking cabin with smoke curling up from the chimney. A sturdy barn stood nearby with fenced-in pastures where cattle were grazing in the summer heat. It wasn't fancy, nothing like Boston, but it was solid and real. It ain't much, Sam said, watching her face. It's beautiful. He looked at her, surprised. Nobody's ever called it that before. Then nobody's been looking at it right. She met his gaze. A place built by one man's two hands, standing tough against all this emptiness. That's a beautiful thing, even if it ain't pretty. A change came over his face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. We'll get you settled in for the night. Tomorrow I'll start showing you the ropes. Tonight is fine. I didn't come all this way just to sit around. You came all this way and nearly boiled alive waiting for a man whose horse lost a shoe. He shook his head. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we work. Ruth Ann wanted to argue, but the bone-deep exhaustion finally caught up with her. Tomorrow, then. They pulled up in front of the cabin. Sam hopped down and helped her out of the wagon. His hands were careful on her waist, calloused and warm. He stepped back right away. There's a room off the main house. It's yours, until you decide you want something different. Bed, washstand, and a window that faces east. You can bunk in the back room by the stove. He picked up her traveling bag. We'll figure out the rest of it as we go. Ruth Ann followed him inside. The cabin was clean but plain. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no pictures on the walls. It was a bachelor's place, all right, built for working, not for comfort. It had a lonely feel to it. Kitchen's over there, pantry's stocked. I'll show you where everything is tomorrow. Thank you, Sam. He set her bag down outside a small door and just stood there, feeling out of place. I was never any good at this sort of thing. It had been a long while since someone else was in the house. She said, I am not much good at it either, but I suppose we can learn together. His guarded gray eyes met hers, and they were not cruel. I reckon we will. He started toward his own room, but then he stopped dead. His hand clamped down on the doorframe, his knuckles showing white. Ruth Ann saw the change come over him. She saw how his eyes stared off at nothing, and how his jaw clenched up tight. His whole body went stiff as a board, like he was living through something a million miles away. Sam. There was no response. Sam. He blinked, and just like that, he was back. His hand slowly let go of the door frame. "I am sorry." His voice came out all rough. "Sometimes I am not all here. Does that happen to you often?" He gave her no answer. He just stood there, breathing slow and steady, pulling himself back to the here and now. And Ruth Ann knew better than to push. She recognized the look of a person whose past had come calling without an invitation. "Good night, Sam." "Night, Ruth Ann." He slipped into his room, and the door clicked shut. Ruth Ann was left standing alone in the little room that was now hers. Through the paper-thin walls, she could hear him moving about, the scrape of a chair, the sound of water being poured, and then only silence. She began to unpack her few things. 2 dresses went on the wall pegs, her brush and comb on the washstand, and the little Bible the preacher's wife had pressed into her hands. She let her mind drift back to Boston, to the pantry, the heavy iron skillet, and the blood. She remembered all the whispers, every door that was closed in her face, every night she spent on a cot in a church basement, wondering if she would ever feel safe in her own skin again. Then she thought about Sam Hartwell's gray eyes, and the way he had listened to her story without so much as flinching. She recalled the words he had spoken, stated like a simple truth. "You are not hopeless at anything. You just have not found the right place to prove it yet. Maybe this little ranch was the place." Ruth Ann lay down on the cot-sized bed. A deep weariness pulled her straight into sleep. Tomorrow, she would start learning the ways of this ranch. Tomorrow, she would show what she was made of. Tomorrow, she would begin to build the kind of life she had never been brave enough to wish for. But for tonight, for the first time in so many months, she was not by herself. Through the wall, she could hear the sound of Sam's breathing. It was ragged at first, but then it evened out. Just 2 strangers under one roof, each carrying their own hurts, each running from their own ghosts, and both of them hoping the other one might just be worth the risk of trusting. Ruth Ann was jolted awake by a loud crash. She shot straight up in bed, her heart hammering in her chest. Pale gray light was just starting to peek through the window. It was dawn. Another crash came from Sam's room. Then she heard a voice, raw and full of pain. "Thomas! Thomas!" Ruth Ann was out of bed before she even knew what she was doing. She hurried across the main room and shoved open Sam's door. He was on the floor, all twisted up in his blankets, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing. His hands were reaching out for something that was not there. "Hold on, Thomas. Just hold on." "Sam." Ruth Ann knelt down right beside him. "Sam, you need to wake up." His hand flew out and grabbed her wrist with a grip like a steel trap. I could not get to him. The smoke. I could not reach him. "Sam." She made her voice as steady and firm as she could. "You are in Montana. You're at home now. The war is over." His eyes finally focused on hers. They were wild and full of desperation. "You are safe," she told him. "Just breathe. All you have to do is breathe." Bit by bit, the crushing grip on her wrist started to loosen. His breathing began to slow down. The wild look in his eyes started to fade. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And she saw a wave of shame wash right over his face. Ruth Ann. He pulled his hand back and pushed himself up to sit against the wall. "I am sorry. I did not mean to. Not mean. Do not you dare apologize. You should not have had to see that. I have seen a whole lot worse." She sat back on her heels. "Thomas was your brother, was not he?" Sam's jaw got tight. He did not say a word. Ruth Ann got to her feet and held out her hand to him. "Come on now. I will make us some coffee." He stared at her offered hand for a long moment before he finally took it. His palm was rough and calloused and shaking just a little. She helped pull him up to his feet. "You are not running." His voice was quiet, like he was confused by it. "Where on earth would I go? Most women would have taken off running after seeing a thing like that." Ruth Ann held his gaze steady. "I once hit a man with a cast-iron skillet and got called a bad name for defending myself. You really think a nightmare is going to scare me off?" Something flickered deep in his eyes. It was not quite gratitude. It was more like he was seeing her for the first time. "Coffee, then," he said. "Coffee." She turned and headed for the kitchen. Behind her, she heard him draw in a long, steadying breath. "Ruth Ann." She paused. "Yeah? Thank you." She did not turn back around. "Do not thank me just yet. I honestly cannot cook a lick." A sound came from behind her. It was rough and completely unexpected. Sam Hartwell was laughing. It was not much, just a short little puff of air, but it was real. Ruth Ann found herself smiling as she walked into the kitchen. Outside, the sun was just starting to climb over the big Montana sky. Another hard summer day was on its way. Another day full of heat and dust and the looks of strangers. But for the first time since she left Boston, Ruth Ann Brennan felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the right place. The coffee was just awful. Ruth Ann stared down into her cup, then looked over at Sam. "I told you I could not cook." Sam took a long drink. His expression did not move a muscle. "I have had worse." "Whereat? In the war?" "Do not go pushing your luck now." She almost let a smile show. Almost. Outside, the sun was already beating down hard. Heat waves were starting to dance off the packed dirt yard. Ruth Ann could feel a bead of sweat forming at her hairline, and she had barely even moved. "So," she set her cup down. "What is the first thing I need to learn?" Sam pushed his chair back from the table. "Have you eaten yet?" "I am not hungry." "I did not ask if you were hungry. I asked if you ate." He reached up and pulled a tin of biscuits off the shelf, setting it on the table in front of her. "Eat. Then we will get to work." Ruth Ann took a bite of a biscuit. It was dry and hard as a rock, probably a week old. "These are even worse than my coffee." "I know." Sam poured himself another cup of the terrible coffee anyway. "That is exactly why I need you to learn how to cook." They made their way outside after the meal. Sam walked with a fast, no-nonsense stride. Ruth Ann had to stretch her own legs to keep pace with him. He took her to the chicken coop first. There were 12 hens and one mean-looking rooster. Eggs every single morning. That rooster's name is Satan. Do not you ever turn your back on him. You named your rooster Satan. He earned that name. The barn was the next stop. Inside were 2 horses, a milk cow he called Bessie, and a loft overflowing with hay that he said needed to be organized. "Can you milk a cow?" "No." "Can you learn how?" "I can learn how to do anything." The corner of Sam's mouth twitched just a bit. "We will see about that." He handed her a bucket, then he pointed at Bessie. "Sit on that stool there. Grab her like this." He was shown. "Pull down nice and easy. Squeeze, then pull, just like that." Ruth Ann sat on the stool. She grabbed on, pulled. Not a thing happened. She gave it another try. Still nothing. Sam sighed. "You are strangling the poor thing." "No, I am not." "Yes, you are. Loosen up that grip. Let the milk flow." Ruth Ann relaxed her hands and pulled. A skinny little stream of milk shot into the bucket. "There you go," he said. She looked up at him, hopeful. "That's it." "That is it. Now just do that about 200 more times." By the time she got done, her hands were screaming and her back was aching something fierce, but that bucket was half full. Sam gave a little nod when he saw it. "Not bad for a girl from the city." "I am not a city girl anymore." "We will see about that." The rest of the morning was a whirlwind of new chores. She fed the chickens, gathered the eggs, and learned where all the tools were supposed to go. Sam explained everything with short, sharp sentences. He did not waste a single word and had no time for questions he figured she could answer on her own. Ruth Ann barely managed to keep up. By noon, she was soaked clean through with sweat, her dress stuck to her back, and her red hair was escaping its pins in a wild mess of curls. She felt absolutely filthy, and she felt completely alive. "Time for dinner," Sam announced. "Then we are riding out to check on the herd." "I do not know how to ride a horse." "Well, you're going to learn today." "Today?" Ruth Ann stared at him. You are enjoying this, aren't you? Enjoying what? Watching me struggle. Sam's face stayed as still as a stone, but a little something flickered deep in his eyes. I am watching you refuse to give up. There is a big difference. Those words landed harder than she expected. They ate a simple lunch in silence. Some bread, a little cheese, and dried beef that Ruth Ann had to chew on for what seemed like a lifetime. While she finished, Sam went and saddled up 2 horses. When she stepped out of the cabin, he was holding the reins of a gentle-looking brown mare. This here is Penny. She is a patient one. She will not throw you off unless you give her a good reason to. How would I do that? Kick her too hard, yank on the reins too rough, or panic and squeeze with your knees when you ought to be staying loose. He stopped for a second. Basically, every single thing you're about to do. Your faith in me is just overwhelming. Faith is earned out here. He cupped his hands together to give her a step up. Left foot here. Swing your right leg clear over. Do not overthink it. Ruth Ann placed her foot in his hands, hoisted herself up, and landed in the saddle with more of a thud than she intended. Penny shifted underneath her. Easy now. Sam's voice went low and soft, calm and steady. She can feel you being nervous. Take a slow breath. Let your weight settle in. Ruth Ann took a deep breath. Penny went still. Good. Sam swung up onto his own horse like he was born to it. Just follow me. Do not even try to steer too much. Penny knows where we are headed. They rode out of the yard and onto the wide open prairie. At first, Ruth Ann held onto the reins way too tight, her whole body stiff as a board with fright. But Penny was a gentle soul, just like Sam had promised. After a little while, Ruth Ann found herself easing into the steady rhythm of the horse's walk. You are doing better, Sam called over his shoulder. I am scared to death. That is perfectly normal. Just keep on going. They located the herd in a valley about 2 miles from the cabin. 50 head of cattle were grazing under the hot summer sun. Sam swung down from his horse and walked among them, his eyes carefully inspecting every animal. Ruth Ann stayed put on Penny, just watching him work. Looking for any sickness, Sam explained, his eyes still on the cattle. Any injuries or signs of predators. Coyotes come down from the hills every now and then. Wolves show up in the winter. What do you do if you discover something is wrong? I fix it if I can, or I put them down if I cannot. You have had to do that. Kill one of your own animals. Sam stood up straight and looked right at her. I have had to do a whole lot of things I never wanted to do. That is part of ranching. That is just part of life. Ruth Ann could hear what he was not saying. The war, his wife, his brother. I am so sorry about Thomas, she said softly. Your brother? I am sorry that you lost him. Sam froze. For a good long while he said nothing at all. You heard my nightmare this morning. I heard you calling for him, saying you could not get to him. There was a fire. His voice was empty, like it was coming from a long way off. Artillery hit our camp. Thomas was pinned under a collapsed beam. I tried my best to get him out, but he paused. He took a hard swallow. I was not able to. Sam, that was 12 years ago. It should not still. It should. Ruth Ann cut him off right there. It absolutely should still matter. He was your brother. Sam looked at her. I mean, he really looked at her. And she saw a little crack form behind the hardness in his eyes. Mary used to say that. My wife, he added quietly. She was the only person who ever really got it. When she passed, I just figured I would have to carry that weight by myself. You do not have to, do I not? No. Ruth Ann held his gaze steady. I do not know the first thing about running a ranch, Sam, but I know a thing or two about carrying burdens by yourself, and I know it is not something you can do forever. Sam just stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned his attention back to the cattle. We ought to head back. There is a storm coming. Ruth Ann glanced up at the sky. It was clear blue. Not a single cloud to be seen. I do not see any storm. The cattle know. See how they are all bunching up together. Sam swung himself back up in his saddle. We have got maybe 2 hours. We need to get back and get the barn secured. They rode back to the ranch at a hard pace. Ruth Ann bounced uncomfortably in the saddle, but she did not utter a single complaint. By the time they made it back to the cabin, big dark clouds were stacking up on the horizon and they were moving in fast. "Help me get these chickens put up," Sam called out. "Then we will handle the horses." Ruth Ann got right to it. The wind hit them before they were done, and it was a howling, mean kind of wind. Ruth Ann's dress whipped around her legs while she chased the last hen toward the coop. That mean old rooster, Satan, was pecking at her ankles the entire time. "Get inside!" Sam yelled over the roar of the wind. "I have got the horses!" Ruth Ann made a run for the cabin. The door slammed shut behind her right as the first bolt of lightning tore across the sky. She stood there in the dim light, catching her breath and listening to the storm just raging outside. The rain pounded on the roof. The thunder shook the very walls. The door flew open. Sam came stumbling in, soaked clean through with water just pouring from his hair. "The horses are in the barn." He forced the door shut against the powerful wind. "Looks like we are stuck in here until this blows over." Ruth Ann looked at him, dripping wet, worn out, and looking more human than she had seen him so far. "I will make some coffee. It is still going to be terrible." "I know." She made the coffee anyway. They sat together at the table, listening to the storm, and for some reason the silence felt different this time. It was not so awkward. It was more like two people figuring out how to share the same space. "You did a good job today," Sam said after a while, "with the milking, the riding, and the chickens. I chased a chicken around for 10 minutes and got attacked by Satan." "And you still caught the chicken," he said with a shrug. "That is the part that counts." Ruth Ann warmed her hands on her coffee cup. "Why does it mean so much to you? Me proving that I can handle things?" Sam was quiet for a good long moment. "My first wife, Elizabeth, she could not handle any of this. Not the work, not the being alone out here, not the tough days. She left after only 8 months. Your letter said you had lost your wife. I did lose her, to a traveling salesman with soft hands." His voice was full of bitterness. "She left a note saying she deserved better than this. She deserved a life that was easier. She deserved a man who could buy her nice things instead of giving her calluses. I am sorry to hear that. Do not be. She was right about one thing. This kind of life is not meant for everybody. It is hard, and it is lonely, and sometimes you can work yourself nearly to death just to find yourself right back where you started." He looked at Ruth Ann, his gaze direct. "I have to know that you are not going to run off. I have to know you will stay, even when things get ugly. I have been through ugly. I made it through. Boston ugly. This here is a different kind." "Is it really?" Ruth Ann put her cup down on the table. "In Boston? I was cornered, attacked, and then I was the one who got blamed for it. I lost absolutely everything. My job, my good name, my entire future. I ended up sleeping in the basement of a church and begging for food scraps." Her voice became hard as stone. "What kind of ugly do you have out here that you think is going to frighten me, Sam Storms? Hard work and chickens?" Something in his expression changed. "You are angry. I have been angry for months on end. I'm just finally done hiding it." "Good." Sam gave a slow nod. "Anger can be useful. Anger is what gets things done." The storm kept on for 3 more hours. They talked through most of it. They talked about the ranch, about all the work that needed to be done, about the neighbors Sam hardly ever saw, and the town he tried to avoid whenever he could. "There is a man named Daniel Crawford," Sam said eventually, his tone turning darker. "His ranch is about 5 miles to the east. He has been trying to buy my land for 2 years now, for the water rights. My creek is what feeds half of his pastures, and you refuse to sell. This land is everything I have left. I built this place from nothing after the war. I am not about to give it up just because some rich man wants more than he already has. What does he do about it? Nothing that the law can touch. He just applies pressure. He lets his cattle wander over onto my land. He spreads rumors about me in town. He just makes my life difficult." Sam's jaw was set tight. He will probably come around eventually, especially once he finds out I have a wife now, to make things even more difficult, to see what kind of person he is up against. Sam looked her right in the eyes. Crawford does not take losing well, and he sure does not like being told no. Well then, it sounds like he and I have something in common. The storm finally passed just before the sun went down. Ruth Ann stepped out onto the porch and found the whole world looking like it had been washed clean. Everything was glistening in the late golden light. Ruth Ann. She turned around. Sam was standing in the doorway, his shape outlined by the lamplight inside. "Tomorrow we are going into town. We will get you some proper clothes for ranch work and introduce you to some of the local folks. Is that really necessary?" "It is necessary." His voice softened just a little bit. "They are going to be talking about you one way or another. It is better if they meet you and see for themselves what you are made of. And what if they do not like what they see? Then they are just a bunch of fools." Sam paused for a moment. "You really impressed me today. And I am not an easy man to impress." Ruth Ann could feel a warmth spreading across her cheeks. "I milked one cow and got attacked by a rooster. And you did not quit. You did not complain. You did not once ask me to slow down or to make things any easier for you." He stepped out onto the porch with her. Elizabeth complained from the very first day. She said the cabin was too small. She said the work was too hard. She said I did not talk enough, or smile enough, or give her enough of my attention. His voice got lower. "You have not complained a single time. I have only been here for one day. The longest day of my life, and you are still standing right here." They just looked at each other as the light faded from the sky. Something passed between them. It was not attraction. Not yet, anyway. It was something more delicate. It was the very first fragile thread of trust. "Thank you," Ruth Ann said in a quiet voice, "for giving me this chance. For believing me about what happened in Boston. Do not go thanking me just yet. You still have not met the neighbors." She almost broke into a smile. "Are they that bad? Margaret Sullivan is going to want to know everything about you. And I mean everything. Where you came from, who your family is, and why a woman of your age is not already married." Sam just shook his head. "She will be polite about it, but believe me, she will be digging for information. I can handle a little digging. I know you can." Sam turned to go back inside. "You should get some rest. It is a long ride to town, and tomorrow is going to be even harder than today was." "That is so encouraging." "I am not here to encourage you. I am here to prepare you." He went back into the house. Ruth Ann stayed on the porch for a while longer, watching the stars begin to pop out in the darkening sky. The air smelled of rain and sagebrush, and something else she could not quite identify. Something that was wild and clean and a world away from Boston. She thought about tomorrow, about having to face a whole town full of strangers, about Margaret Sullivan's prying questions and Daniel Crawford's constant pressure, and all the possible ways this new life could crumble into dust before it even had a chance to grow. But then she pictured Sam's gray eyes. She remembered how he just listened, without a hint of judgment, and how he shared his own hurt right after she'd shared hers. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. Maybe she could build a real life out here. Ruth Ann went back inside, shutting the door on the vast, dark night. The next morning arrived far too early. Ruth Ann woke up before the sun, every muscle in her body complaining from the day before, only to find Sam already busy at the stove. "Made coffee," he said, his back still to her. "Figured you would want something that actually tastes like it for once." She accepted the cup he held out and took a sip. It was surprisingly good. "You will have to teach me how to do that later. Get your things on. We are leaving in an hour." The ride into town took a whole lot longer than Ruth Ann had guessed. Sam let the horses take their time, pointing things out as they went. He told her whose land they were crossing, where the fence lines were drawn, which neighbors were good folks, and which ones to keep your distance from. Eliza Thornton's place is just over that rise. She is a widow, runs that whole ranch by herself since her husband passed on 10 years ago. She will take a liking to you. And how do you know that? Because she does not suffer fools either. They finally made it to Copper Creek just as the town was starting to stir. Ruth Ann saw Margaret Sullivan sweeping the wooden porch of the general store. The blacksmith was already hard at it, with sparks flying from his shop. And standing right in the middle of the dusty street, like he owned it, was a man Ruth Ann had never laid eyes on. He was tall and dressed too nicely, way too clean for this part of Texas. He wore a smile that never quite made it to his eyes. Sam's whole body went stiff as a board. Hartwell. The man gave a little tip of his hat. I heard you finally went and got yourself a wife. I had to come see with my own 2 eyes. Crawford? Sam's voice was cold enough to make a man shiver. Get out of our way. Now that is no way to talk to a neighbor. Crawford's eyes slid right over to Ruth Ann. He looked her over the same way a man prices cattle at an auction. This is her? This is the woman you sent all the way off for. Ruth Ann felt her back straighten up like a poker. I am Ruth Ann Brennan. Brennan. Crawford's smile got even wider. That is Irish. I can hear it plain as day in your voice. Boston, if I am not mistaken. You are not interesting. He took a step toward the wagon. A step too close. A Boston Irish girl all the way out here in Texas. You must have been mighty desperate to answer some stranger's letter. Sam moved before Ruth Ann even had a chance to think. He was down from that wagon and right in Crawford's face before you could blink. Say one more word about my wife, I dare you. That fake smile finally vanished from Crawford's face. You better be careful, Hartwell. That temper of yours is going to land you in a heap of trouble one of these days. And that mouth of yours will do the same for you. The 2 men just stood there, squared off, the air between them so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ruth Ann climbed down from the wagon and stepped right between them. Mr. Crawford? Her voice was perfectly pleasant and cold as ice. I am certain you have other business to attend to. Please do not let us keep you. Crawford stared at her. For a second, something changed in his eyes. Maybe it was surprise. Or maybe he was sizing her up all over again. She has got some fire in her, he said to Sam. I will give you that much. She is not yours to be giving anything to. Sam had not budged an inch, not relaxed one bit. Now get out of my way. Crawford tipped his hat one more time. We will be talking soon, Hartwell, about those water rights. Now that you have a wife to consider, maybe you will start to see reason. And then he walked away. Sam just stood there for a good long while, breathing heavy. Finally, he turned to Ruth Ann. You should not have gotten in the middle of that. You should not have let him get a rise out of you. He was insulting you. And I can handle being insulted. Ruth Ann met his gaze and held it. I have been handling insults my entire life. What I cannot handle is you getting into some street brawl on my account and making a bad situation even worse. Sam just stared at her for a moment, then, real slow, his shoulders sagged. You are right. I know I am right. That does not mean I enjoyed hearing it. You had better get used to it. Ruth Ann turned and started for the general store. Well, are we going to buy our supplies, or are we going to stand here in the middle of the street all morning? Sam almost cracked a smile. Almost. Supplies it is, he said. Lord help me. They walked into the store side by side. Margaret Sullivan was waiting for them. Margaret Sullivan looked Ruth Ann up and down like she was a horse she was thinking about buying. So you are the one? I am the one. Boston, I hear. That is correct. Margaret's eyes got narrow. I have to wonder what brings a woman from Boston all the way out to Texas. Must be running from something. Ruth Ann felt Sam get tense right next to her. She laid a hand on his arm, a silent signal to stay calm. "I was running towards something, Mrs. Sullivan, a new life, a chance to start fresh." Hmm. Margaret did not look one bit convinced. "We will just see about that." She turned on her heel and vanished into the back room of the store. Ruth Ann let out a long breath she did not even realize she was holding. "That went well," Sam said under his breath. "Did it? She did not run you out of her store. I reckon that is something." They spent a full hour in that store. Ruth Ann chose some sensible work dresses, a pair of sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep the Texas sun off her face. Sam paid for it all without a word of protest, though his jaw was set hard every time Margaret glanced in their direction. When they finally walked back out into the daylight, Ruth Ann's arms were piled high with packages and her head felt like it was spinning. Is every single person in this town this suspicious? Most of them are. Sam took some of the packages from her. "They will come around eventually." "How, eventually?" "Give it about a year." "A year? Maybe 2. Ruth Ann almost let out a laugh. Almost. They were busy loading up the wagon when a woman's voice called out from across the street. "Sam Hartwell, is that a wife you have got with you?" Ruth Ann turned to look. A woman who looked to be in her 50s was walking straight toward them. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was lined from the sun but had a kindness to it. She walked with the confidence of someone who had worked hard her whole life and was not about to stop now. "Eliza." Sam's voice sounded a little warmer. "This is Ruth Ann." "Ruth Ann, this is Eliza Thornton. She owns the ranch just north of ours. The widow who runs her place all by herself." Ruth Ann offered her hand. "Sam has told me about you." Eliza's handshake was firm and strong. "Oh, he has he? And what did he have to say?" "That you do not put up with fools." Eliza laughed, a real, genuine laugh that was loud and free. "Well, that is the gospel truth. And what about you? Do you put up with fools?" "Not any more, I do not." A look of something passed over Eliza's eyes. It looked like approval. "Good. You're going to need that spirit out here." She looked over at Sam. "Crawford was sniffing around town earlier. I saw him talking to the blacksmith, asking a whole lot of questions." Sam's face grew dark. "What sort of questions?" "Questions about your water, about your new wife, about whether you might be ready to sell your land now that you have got another mouth to feed." "I am not selling. I know that. But he does not." Eliza lowered her voice a little. "You watch your back, Sam." Crawford has been getting more and more desperate. He lost 300 head of cattle in the drought last month. He needs your water, and desperate men are known to do desperate things. Just let him try something. That is exactly what I'm afraid of." Eliza turned her attention back to Ruth Ann. "You keep an eye on him, too. Crawford has a tongue smoother than whiskey, but a heart as black as tar. He will try to get to Sam by going through you if he thinks he can. He already tried, and I told him to go find some other place to be." Eliza smiled wide. "I like her, Sam. Do not you go and mess this one up." She walked off before Sam even had a chance to answer. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Ruth Ann could practically feel the worry coming off of Sam. She could see it in how straight he held his shoulders and the way his hands gripped the leather reins. "You are worried about Crawford. I am always worried about Crawford. What has he done in the past?" Sam did not answer for a long time. "Last spring, somebody cut my DS7 fence line. 30 of my cattle wandered right onto Crawford's land. He claimed he found them as strays. Said they had been on his property for weeks. It took me a whole month to get them back. And even then, I am not certain I got all of them. You think he is the one who did it? I cannot prove it. But yes, I think he did it. What about the law?" Sam let out a bitter laugh. "The sheriff is Crawford's cousin." "What do you think that means?" Ruth Ann felt a chill go down her spine despite the blistering heat. "So he can just do whatever he pleases, as long as he is smart about it, and as long as nobody can prove he did it." Sam just shook his head. That is why I have to keep this ranch running right. I need the herd to be strong. I need everything to be in perfect order so that when he decides to come after me again, I will be able to withstand it. And me? Where do I fit into all of this? Sam shot a quick glance at her. You fit in wherever you decide you fit in. I am not going to tell you what to do, Ruth Ann. I am just telling you the truth of what we are up against. They finally pulled into the ranch yard just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. Ruth Ann helped Sam unload their supplies from the wagon, and they ate a silent supper of bread and stew that she had somehow managed not to burn. That night, as she lay in her small, narrow bed, Ruth Ann listened to the deep silence of the Texas plains and thought long and hard about what she had signed up for. Crawford, the drought, the suspicious town folk, and a husband who still jumped if she moved too quickly, who still woke up fence line, and he let 30 head of my cattle wander right onto Crawford's property. He claimed they were just strays, said they had been on his land for weeks. It took me a whole month to get them back, and to this day I am still not sure I got all of them. You think he did it on purpose? I cannot prove it, but yes, I believe he did. What about the law? Sam let out a bitter laugh. The sheriff is Crawford's cousin. So, what do you think? Ruth Ann felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm air. So, he can basically do whatever he wants, as long as he's careful about it, and as long as there is no proof. Sam shook his head. That is exactly why I need this ranch running perfectly. I need the herd to be healthy. I need everything to be in order, so that when he decides to come after me again, I will be able to withstand it. And me? Where do I fit into all of this? Sam glanced over at her. You fit in wherever you decide to fit in. I am not going to be the one to tell you what to do, Ruth Ann. I'm just telling you exactly what we are up against. They pulled into the ranch yard just as the sun was setting. Ruth Ann helped Sam unload the wagon, and they had a quiet supper of bread and the stew she had managed not to burn. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Ruth Ann listened to the deep silence of the Texas plains and thought long and hard about what she had gotten herself into. Crawford, the drought, the suspicious neighbors, and a husband who still flinched every time she moved too quickly, who still woke, yelling his brother's name in his sleep. This was so much harder than she had ever imagined. It was harder than Boston in a lot of ways. But it was honest. It was real. And that had to count for something. 3 weeks went by. Ruth Ann learned how to cook meals that did not taste like they were made from old leather. She learned how to sit a horse without bouncing around like a sack of grain. She learned which of the chickens were friendly and which ones would try to peck your eyes out if you gave them half a chance. And she learned about Sam, too. She learned that he was up before the sun every single day, no matter how tired he was from working the night before. She learned that he would talk to the horses in a low voice when he thought no one else was around to hear him. He spoke gentle words she could never quite understand. She learned that he kept a little wooden box tucked away under his bed. One night, when he thought she was fast asleep, she saw him open it up and just hold whatever was inside. It looked like a ribbon, maybe something that had belonged to somebody else. His first wife, Elizabeth, or maybe his brother. She never asked him about it. Some wounds are just not ready to be touched. They worked together from sunup to sundown, and little by little the quiet between them started to feel comfortable instead of heavy. Every now and then, Sam would almost smile at something she said. And sometimes Ruth Ann would look up and catch him just watching her with a look she just could not figure out. Something was taking root between them, something delicate and new. Ruth Ann was scared to even put a name to it. The drought really bit down in the 4th week. Ruth Ann saw it first down at the creek. The water line had sunk overnight. The current was now just a slow crawl. Sam. He came running when he heard her call. He took one look at the creek, and his face went white as a sheet. Crawford. You reckon he's put a dam upstream? He's been threatening to shut it off for years. Sam was already striding toward the horses. I've got to go see for myself. I'm going with you. Ruth Ann, I am going. He stared at her for a long, hard second, then gave a single nod. They rode fast, pushing the horses hard up into the hills where Crawford's land met theirs. And there it was, a fresh-built, slapdash dam, turning the water from Sam's property over to Crawford's. That son of a gun! Sam's voice was shaking with rage. He really went and did it. Is that legal? No, well, maybe. I do not know. Sam raked a hand through his hair. Water rights around here are a tangled mess. He will claim he is just taking his fair portion. I will say he is stealing mine. The sheriff is not going to lift a finger. It will end up in court, drag on for months, and my cattle will be long dead by then. So what are we going to do? Sam just glared at the dam. Ruth Ann could practically see the gears turning in his head, weighing his choices and finding every last one of them lacking. We find a way. Find another water source. Maybe drill a well if we can scrape the money together. He turned his horse back around. Let us go. There is nothing for us here. They rode back in a thick, heavy silence. The next few days were a living nightmare. Sam worked from sunup to sundown trying to keep the herd alive, hauling water from a pond 2 miles away, stretching every drop they had. Ruth Ann was right there with him, her hands getting blistered and her back screaming in protest. And every night Sam's terrors got worse. Tamza Thomas. Ruth Ann stopped trying to sleep after she heard him. She would just lie there in her own bed, listening to him claw his way back to the present, wondering if she ought to go to him, and if he would even let her. On the 5th night, she could not stand it anymore. She swung out of bed, walked over to his door, and knocked lightly. Sam? No reply, but the struggling sounds had stopped. Sam, I'm coming in. She eased the door open. He was sitting on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. It was not crying. It was something worse, something deeper. Ruth Ann sat down next to him, close enough to feel the heat coming off him, but she did not touch him. You do not have to talk about it. I know, but I am here if you decide you want to. A long quiet stretched between them. Then, at last, his voice came out, raw and broken. It is worse when things go wrong. The ranch, the water, Crawford. When things start falling apart, I'm right back in that field, watching Thomas burn, smelling that smoke, hearing his screams. Ruth Ann felt her heart tighten in her chest. Sam, I could not get him out. I tried. Lord, I tried, but that beam was too heavy and the fire was just too hot. And his voice broke, I left him there. I ran to save my own hide. I left my brother to die. You had no choice. There is always a choice. No. Ruth Ann's voice became hard as iron. There is not. Sometimes the only choice is to live or to die right there with them. You chose to live. That is not being a coward. That is being human. Sam finally looked up at her. His eyes were wet, filled with devastation. Elizabeth could not understand it. She said I was damaged goods, said the war broke something inside me that could never be mended. He let out a bitter laugh. Maybe she was right about that. She was wrong. Ruth Ann reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers like a drowning man grabbing for a lifeline. You are not broken, Sam. You are wounded. There is a difference. Is there? Broken means it is ruined for good. Wounded means it can heal. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. You can heal if you just let yourself. They sat there together in the dark for what felt like a lifetime. Not talking, just breathing, just sharing the same small space. Finally, Sam's grip on her hand eased up. His breathing evened out. Thank you, he whispered. Do not thank me yet. Tomorrow is going to be another kind of hell. I know. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But at least I will not be facing it by myself. Ruth Ann went back to her room, but something had shifted between them. Something real important. The next morning, Jake Thornton came riding in at dawn. Ruth Ann heard the horse and came out of the cabin, still yanking on her boots. Sam was already out in the yard talking to the young man who looked like he was about to jump out of his skin. Fire, Jake was saying. It started over on Crawford's land, but it is heading this way, and it is moving fast. Ma sent me to give you a warning. Sam's face turned pale. How far out? About 5 miles. The wind is pushing it straight south. That is headed right for our pastures. Sam was already in motion. Ruth Ann, I need you to get the horses out of the barn. Move them to the far corral. Jake, you help me round up as many of the cattle as we can manage. What about the cabin? If the fire gets to the cabin, we have got much bigger problems. Sam snatched a saddle from the rail. Move! Now! Ruth Ann moved. The next 2 hours were pure chaos. She got the horses clear, then sprinted back for the chickens, then helped Sam and Jake push the cattle away from the oncoming flames. The smoke hit them first, thick and choking, painting the sky a sickening orange. "It is jumping the ridge," Jake hollered. "We have got to go." "Not yet." Sam was still fighting with a group of stubborn steers. "We cannot lose them, Sam." Ruth Ann grabbed his arm. "We have to go now." He looked at her, his eyes wild and desperate. "I cannot lose this ranch. It is everything I have. You have me." The words just tumbled out of her before she could stop them. "You have me, Sam, and I need you to stay alive." Something in his face just broke. Something finally gave way. "All right." He swung up onto his horse. "All right, let us ride." They rode hard with the fire roaring right behind them. Ruth Ann could feel the intense heat on her back. She could hear the awful crackle of the flames eating up everything in their path. They reached the far ridge just as the fire swallowed the ranch. Ruth Ann watched as the cabin was engulfed in flames. "No." Sam's voice was barely a whisper. "No, no, no." He started to turn his horse back. Ruth Ann grabbed onto his reins. "Sam, you have to stop. That is my home. That is everything I have built, and you will be dead if you go back in there. I do not care." "Well, I do." She was crying by then, the tears making clean streaks through the soot on her face. "I care, you stupid, stubborn man. I care." Sam stopped trying to pull away. He just looked at her. The fire was roaring behind them. Everything he had spent 10 years building was turning into ash, but he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the whole world that mattered. "Ruth Ann, do not you dare leave me." Her voice broke on the words. "Do not you dare die on me. Not now. Not when I have finally—" She could not get the words out. She could not say it. Sam reached out and took her face between his hands. His palms were rough and warm and trembling. "I am not going anywhere. You have to promise me. I promise." Then he kissed her. It was not gentle, and it was not careful. It was desperate and fierce, and it tasted of smoke and fear and something else that felt an awful lot like hope. Ruth Ann kissed him right back. All around them, the fire just burned on. It felt like the world was coming to an end. But in that one moment, Ruth Ann did not care about the cabin, or the cattle, or whatever came next. She just cared about this man. This broken, stubborn, beautiful man who had given her a chance when not another soul in the world would. When they finally broke apart, Sam pressed his forehead against hers. "We will rebuild." "What?" "The cabin, the barn, everything we lost." His voice was solid now, full of resolve. "We are going to rebuild it all together." "Do you really mean that?" "I mean every word I say to you, Ruth Ann." He drew back to look her in the eye. "I do not know exactly when it happened, but somewhere over these past few weeks, you have become the most important thing on this whole ranch. More important than this land, more important than all the cattle." He took a breath. "More important than the ghosts I have been carrying around." Ruth Ann felt fresh tears start to fall. "Sam, I love you." The words felt like a lightning strike the moment they left her mouth. "You what?" "I love you. And I'm so sorry it took a fire to make me finally say it." A faint smile touched his lips. "I have never been good with words. You are getting better at it." She kissed him again, but this one was softer. It was a promise, not a desperate plea. When they finally broke apart, Jake Thornton was pointedly staring off at something in the distance. "Fire is dying down," he called out. "The wind has shifted." Sam turned and looked out at his ranch. The cabin was gone. The barn was beat up, but the fences were somehow still standing. And way out in the pasture, Ruth Ann could see the cattle moving around, alive. They had been spared by their frantic escape. "We did not lose everything," she whispered. "No." Sam gently took her hand. "We didn't lose the things that matter." They rode back down the hill as the smoke began to thin. The damage was awful, but it wasn't the total disaster it first looked like. The barn would need some work, but its main frame was still standing strong. The root cellar was untouched. The wells were fine, and most of the cattle had made it through. "Someone set that fire," Sam said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "It didn't start on its own, not in that spot, not spreading that quick." Ruth Ann felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Crawford. Crawford," she breathed. "Can you prove it?" "No, but I know it was him." Sam stared at the charred timbers of his cabin. "He wanted to run me off. He wanted to break my spirit so I'd sell the land." "Did it work?" Sam stood silent for a long, heavy moment. Then he squared his shoulders. "No, it surely did not work." He turned and looked right at her. "He doesn't know who he's messing with, not with either one of us." Something swelled in Ruth Ann's chest, a mix of pride, grit, and pure anger. "So, what are we going to do?" "First, we build again. Then we show Crawford and anybody else watching that we aren't going anywhere." Sam's jaw was set like stone. "And when the time is right, we're going to make him pay for this." "How?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, squeezing her hand. "But we'll figure it out, together." The sun was dipping behind the mountains, painting the smoky sky in hues of fiery red and gold. Ruth Ann stood there in the ashes of what was to be her home, holding the hand of a man she had known for less than a single month. Everything was different now. And everything was just getting started. They made their bed in the barn that first night. Ruth Ann lay on a mound of clean hay with Sam's arm wrapped around her. They both smelled of smoke and sweat and were tired down to the bone. It should have been miserable. It should have felt like giving up. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. "You still awake?" Sam's voice was a low rumble in his chest. "Can't seem to sleep." "Me neither." He pulled her in a little tighter. "I keep thinking about all we lost. And I keep thinking about what we still have." Sam was quiet for a second. "You're a stronger person than me, Ruth Ann. No, just more stubborn. Just more—" He almost let out a laugh. Almost. The morning sun came up harsh and way too bright. Ruth Ann woke to the sound of hooves, a lot of them, coming up the trail fast. Sam was already up, holding his rifle. "Stay put." "The hell I will." They walked out of the barn together. Eliza Thornton was at the front of the group, riding her big gray horse. Jake, the blacksmith from town, was with her. 3 other fellas Ruth Ann didn't know were there too. And pulling up behind them were 2 wagons, loaded down with fresh lumber and supplies. "Heard what happened?" Eliza called out as she swung down from her saddle. "Figured y'all could use a hand." Sam's jaw was working. "Eliza, you don't have to do this." "Hush up, Sam." Eliza's voice was firm but full of kindness. "We're neighbors. This is what neighbors are for." The blacksmith came forward. "Name's Tom Garrett. We met for a second, Mrs. Hartwell. I know folks ain't been too friendly, but nobody deserves what that snake Crawford did to you." "You think it was Crawford?" Ruth Ann asked. "Everybody thinks it was." Tom spat on the ground. "That fire started on his land. It spread way too fast to be an accident. That man's been collecting enemies for years. This right here was just the last straw for folks." More wagons rolled in all morning. Margaret Sullivan showed up with baskets of food. The Reverend came with a prayer on his lips and 2 strong hands ready to work. Even people Ruth Ann had never laid eyes on before came, carrying tools and lumber, and a simple, powerful will to help. By noon, the frame of a new cabin was already rising up. Ruth Ann worked right alongside the other women, cooking for the men, hauling water, and doing anything that needed to be done. Her hands got blistered all over again. Her back was screaming in protest. She just kept going. You're pushing yourself way too hard, Margaret said to her during a short water break. I'm fine. You're as pale as a sheet, and I saw you nearly stumble twice this morning. Margaret's eyes got narrow. When was the last time you ate a real meal? I can't remember. That's what I figured. Margaret put a warm biscuit in her hand. Eat this, and then you rest. This work will still be here when you get back to it. Ruth Ann ate the biscuit, but she did not rest. Sam found her at sunset, sitting on a stack of lumber and just staring at the skeleton of their new house. You ought to be inside the barn. It's getting chilly out here. I wanted to see it, Ruth Ann said without looking at him. She needed to believe it was really happening. Sam sat down next to her and took her hand. It's real. We're going to be all right. Are we? She finally turned to look at him. Crawford is still out there. He still wants your ranch. What's to stop him from doing this all over again? Me. Sam's voice turned hard as iron. I'm going to stop him. How? I don't know yet, but I'll find a way. Ruth Ann wanted to believe him with all her heart. She had to believe him, but deep down a cold fear lingered. The next week flew by in a flurry of hammers and saws. The new cabin started to look like a home, smaller than the first one, but built solid. The community came every single day, working from sunup to sundown, and they wouldn't take a dime for it. You'd do the same for any of us, Eliza said when Ruth Ann tried to thank her. That's just how it works out here. We all survive together. Or we don't survive at all. But Crawford hadn't given up. Ruth Ann was in town to pick up supplies when she heard the whispering. Did you hear about that Hartwell woman? What about her? Someone said she got run out of Boston over some kind of scandal. Ruth Ann went perfectly still. She turned around slowly. Two women were standing by the bolts of cloth, their heads close together. Their voices were low, but not quite low enough. What kind of scandal? The worst kind. They say she attacked a man, tried to get him into her bed, and when he said no, that is a lie. The women jumped and spun around. Ruth Ann walked right up to them, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands trembling. That is a flat-out lie, and I want to know who fed it to you. The women looked at each other. The older, bolder one took a half-step forward. Mr. Crawford happened to mention it, said he heard it from a friend back east. Said we all ought to know what kind of woman Sam Hartwell brought to our town. Ruth Ann felt the blood rush from her face. Crawford? Of course it was Crawford. The truth, Ruth Ann said, her voice holding steady even though she was terrified, is that I was a housekeeper in Boston. My employer's son tried to force himself on me. I fought him off. His mother decided to believe her son instead of me. The women just stared at her. I was blamed for something I never did. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. I came here hoping to start over. Ruth Ann lifted her chin. You can believe what you want to believe, but I know the truth, and God knows the truth. She turned on her heel and walked out of that store. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she was almost home. Sam knew something was wrong the second she came through the door. What happened? Crawford? Ruth Ann set the supplies on the table with shaky hands. He's spreading lies about Boston, about what happened to me. Sam's face grew dark and dangerous. What exactly is he saying? The lie. The same one that ruined my life back there. Ruth Ann felt tears welling up, but forced them down. He's trying to turn the whole town against me, against us. That son of a... But Sam was already grabbing his hat and heading for the door. Sam, wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. What do you want me to do, Ruth Ann? Just let him destroy you? Let him win? No. I want you to think. She walked over to him and put a hand on his arm. He wants you to come after him. He's baiting you. He wants you to do something foolish so he can get you arrested or shot. Don't you give him what he wants. Sam stood there stiff as a board, every muscle pulled tight with rage. I can't just stand here and do nothing. Then do something smart. We find proof. We build a case against him. We make him pay the right way. The law doesn't work for folks like us, and you know it. Then we'll make it work, Ruth Ann said, squeezing his arm. I didn't make it out of Boston just to watch you get killed in some gunfight. Please, Sam. Please, just think. A long, tense moment hung in the air. Slowly, Sam's shoulders began to relax. You're right. You're always right. He finally turned to face her. But I am not letting this go. I know you're not. We'll figure it out together. Sam pulled her into his arms and held her tight against his chest. I love you, he said into her hair. I should have said it sooner. I should have told you every single day. Tell me now. I love you. I love you. I love you. Ruth Ann closed her eyes and just let his words sink in. They would find a way. They had to. The answer they needed came from a place they didn't expect. Jake Thornton rode up 3 days later, out of breath and with a wild look in his eyes. I found something. Y'all have got to see this. They followed him to the edge of Crawford's property, keeping low in the scrub brush. Jake pointed to a small clearing where a couple of men were working. Just watch. Ruth Ann watched them. The men were building a small structure. It was right next to the creek. Another dam, Sam said, his voice a low, furious growl. No, look closer. Sam narrowed his eyes. Then his whole expression changed. That's kerosene. They're storing up kerosene, Jake confirmed, and a whole lot of it. I tailed Crawford's foreman yesterday. He bought 6 barrels off a trader who was just passing through. He claimed it was for lanterns, but ain't nobody needs that much kerosene just for some lanterns. He's planning to set another fire. That's what I was thinking, Jake said, looking at both of them. But here's the thing. I wrote down the dates. I wrote down what I saw. I even got the trader's name. I reckon he'll talk if we make it worth his while. Hope surged in Ruth Ann's chest. That's evidence. It's a start, Sam said. He was thinking now, that tactical part of his mind finally clicking into gear. But we need more. We need to catch him red-handed. How do we do that? We set a trap. Sam's eyes met Ruth Ann's. We make him think we're vulnerable. We let him think we're just about to break. He'll make his move, and when he does, we'll be waiting for him. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, Sam said, taking her hands in his. But it's a hell of a lot better than waiting around for him to try and burn us out for good. Ruth Ann thought about Boston. She thought about waiting for things to get better when they only got worse, about doing nothing while her whole life fell apart around her. All right, she said, let's do this thing. They started putting the word out real quiet-like, telling only certain people that Sam was in a bad way, that the fire had plumb broke his spirit. They let it be known that Ruth Ann was thinking about packing it in and heading back east. It didn't take but a week for those whispers to find their way to Crawford. Ruth Ann got the news straight from Margaret Sullivan, who said he'd been in her store just yesterday, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. He'd asked if it was true Sam was given up, asked if that piece of land might be on the market soon. What did you say to him? She asked. I told him I didn't know a thing about Sam Hartwell's business. Margaret took a breath. But I sure didn't say it wasn't true neither. Good. Margaret looked her square in the eye. You're cooking something up, I can tell. Just you be careful, Ruth Ann. That Crawford fella ain't got a conscience. If he gets it in his head you're a problem, he'll come for you straight on. Let him try. That evening, Ruth Ann told Sam what was said. He gave a slow nod. It's working. He thinks we're done for. Sam was cleaning his rifle, his hands moving steady and sure. Jake's been keeping an eye on Crawford's place every night. We'll know when they're fixing to move. And then? Then we put a stop to them. We get folks to see it, and we get the proof we need. Sam looked up from his work. We put Daniel Crawford behind bars, right where he belongs. You really think we can do that? Truly? I reckon we've got to try. Sam put the rifle down and walked over to her. I'm plain tired of being scared of him, Ruth Ann. Tired of wondering when he'll strike next. If we're going to make a life out here, we have to settle this for good. Ruth Ann nodded. She knew he was right. But later that night, lying there in Sam's arms in their half-built cabin, she came to a decision of her own. If Crawford came after them, she wasn't about to hide. She wasn't going to run. She was going to fight. The waiting was the hardest part of all. The days just dragged on. A whole week went by. Ruth Ann kept to her daily chores, but every single moment felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Every distant sound of a horse made her heart jump into her throat. Every shadow looked like a threat. And then one morning it all changed. Ruth Ann woke up feeling awful, ran for the outhouse and got sick until there was nothing left. Sam found her there, looking pale as a ghost and shaken. "You're sick. I'm all right." "No, you're not all right. You've been worn out for weeks. You fainted twice last month, and now this." Sam's eyes studied her face. "Ruth Ann, what is going on?" She looked right at him. Her husband, this man who had given her everything he had. She knew right then she couldn't tell him a lie. "I think I might be pregnant." Sam froze solid like a statue. "What did you say?" "I'm not certain, but all the signs are there." Ruth Ann's hand drifted down to her belly. "I think I'm carrying your child." Sam just stared at her, his face impossible to read. The next thing she knew, he was on his knees right in front of her. His hands covered hers on her stomach, and his eyes started welling up with tears. A baby, maybe, most likely. Ruth Ann could feel her own tears start to fall. Is this all right with you? Is this okay?" Sam let out a laugh, a broken, wondrous sound. "Ruth Ann, this is everything. This is more than I ever imagined I'd have again. Again." A shadow passed over Sam's face. "Mary, my first wife, she passed away in childbirth. The baby did too." Ruth Ann felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Sam, I figured I'd never get another chance. I thought the good Lord was punishing me for something." He pressed his forehead gently against her belly. "But now you're here. And we're going to have a child. You're not scared?" "I'm terrified." He looked up at her then. "But I'm also happier than I've been in 10 years, maybe my whole life." Ruth Ann pulled him to his feet and gave him a long, hard kiss. "We are going to be parents. We are going to be a family." It was a perfect, peaceful moment. And that's right when Jake Thornton came busting in on his horse at a dead run. "Tonight," he yelled out. "They're making their move tonight." Everything kicked into high gear after that. Sam grabbed his rifle, his pistol, and a box of extra shells. Ruth Ann made to go with him, but he stopped her right at the door. "No, Sam, you are carrying my child. I will not risk you." His voice was steady and left no room for argument. "You stay put. Eliza is on her way to sit with you. And what if something happens to you? It won't. You can't promise me that." Sam took her face between his hands. "I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to come back home to you, to both of you." He kissed her then, a deep and desperate kiss, and then he was gone. Ruth Ann just stood in that doorway and watched him ride off, her hand pressed flat against her belly, her heart screaming inside her chest. Eliza showed up about an hour later. "He's got 6 men with him," she said, not wasting any time. "Jake, Tom Garrett, the Reverend, and 3 other fellas who've had their fill of Crawford. Is that going to be enough?" "It's going to have to be." So they waited. The hours just crept by. Ruth Ann paced the floor, then sat, then got up to pace some more. Every little sound made her jump right out of her skin. Every stretch of silence felt heavy with dread. Midnight came and went. Then 1 o'clock. Then 2. "Something's wrong," Ruth Ann said. "They ought to be back by now. These things can take time." "Or something went terribly wrong." Ruth Ann snatched her coat. "I'm going." "Ruth Ann, no. I can't just sit here and do nothing." Ruth Ann's voice was breaking. "He's my husband. He's the father of my baby. I have to know." Eliza stood up, her face a mix of fear and seeing it her way. Then I'm coming with you." They rode like the wind through the dark, following the path Jake had laid out. Ruth Ann's heart hammered against her ribs with every gallop. Her mind was painting all sorts of awful pictures. Sam, hurt. Sam, gone. Sam, burning just like his cabin had. And then she heard the gunshots. "Over there!" Eliza pointed toward a flicker of light off in the distance. They spurred their horses on, even faster. When they came over the top of the ridge, Ruth Ann saw it all laid out below. The kerosene stores were on fire. Men were scattered all over the clearing, some still fighting, some running for their lives. And right in the middle of it all, Sam was tangled up with Daniel Crawford. The two of them were locked in a mean, brutal fight. Sam! Ruth Ann was off her horse before she even thought about it. She started running straight for the fight. Crawford saw her coming. His eyes got wide and he shoved Sam away hard. He pulled a pistol and aimed it straight at Ruth Ann. "You stop right there." Ruth Ann froze. The air caught in her lungs. "Crawford, don't you do it!" Sam's voice was filled with desperation. "This is between you and me. Not anymore, it ain't." Crawford's smile was ugly and full of victory. "Drop your weapon, Hartwell, or your pretty little wife gets a bullet." Sam paused, his eyes locked on Ruth Ann. She gave a tiny shake of her head. "Don't." But Sam let his rifle fall to the dirt. Now the pistol. Sam dropped that too. Crawford let out a harsh laugh. "You're just pathetic, going through all this trouble for a woman. A used-up Irish girl nobody else even wanted." He motioned with the gun. "Come on over here, Mrs. Hartwell. Let's just see what all this fuss is about." Ruth Ann didn't budge. "I said, come here." "No." Crawford's face twisted up with rage. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no." Ruth Ann's voice was steady, even though she was terrified clear through. "You're not going to shoot me, Crawford. You've got witnesses all around. You'd hang for murder. There won't be any witnesses left when I'm through." "Oh, yes, there will." Ruth Ann pointed. "You just look." Crawford turned his head. Half the town was riding in. Men carrying torches, men holding rifles. And leading the whole group was the sheriff, Crawford's own cousin. "It is over, Daniel," the sheriff called out. "Crawford, you put that gun down. You can't be thinking straight. You're my own blood. You lit fires, you tried to steal our water, and you threatened a woman carrying a child." The sheriff's voice was as cold as a winter morning. "That word, family, it does not mean what you seem to think it does." Crawford's face twisted from pure rage to disbelief, and then it just crumbled into despair. The pistol fell from his hand. At that signal, the sheriff's men moved in like a flood. They had Crawford in chains in less than a minute, and Sam was already running to Ruth Ann, gathering her up in his arms and holding her like he might never let her go. "Don't you ever do that again," he whispered into her hair. "Don't you ever put yourself in harm's way like that. I could not just stand by and let him kill you. I would have figured something out. You did not have to. We figured it out together." Sam pulled back to look her in the eye. "You told him you were pregnant right in front of everybody. Was I supposed to keep it a secret?" "No, it is just—" Sam let out a shaky laugh. "I just wanted to be there when you shared our news, not when you were staring down a barrel. I was scared to death." "Me too." Ruth Ann cupped his face with her hands. "But we won, Sam. We actually won this fight." Sam gave her a kiss. It was soft and sweet, and filled with tomorrow. All around them, the night was alive with torchlight and voices and the sound of justice finally being served. Crawford was hauled off in his chains. His land would be taken. His crimes would be judged in a real court of law, not one run by his cousin. And Ruth Ann stood there, safe in her husband's arms with one hand on her belly, watching the sun come up over the Montana plains. They had lost nearly everything they had. They had built it all back up, and now they would build something even bigger together. The trial took all of 3 days. Ruth Ann sat right in the front row of that courthouse, her hand holding Sam's, as she watched Daniel Crawford answer for every single thing he had done. The kerosene, the dam, the fires, the threats. One witness after another came forward. Folks who had been too scared to say a word before were now made bold by Crawford's fall from power. The verdict was read on the third afternoon. Guilty. Crawford's face went pale as a sheet. His lawyer jumped up to object. The judge shut him down with just one hard look. Daniel Crawford, I sentence you to 15 years in the territorial prison. May God have mercy on your soul, because this town sure will not. The courtroom just about exploded with noise. Ruth Ann felt Sam's hand tighten around hers. She looked over at him and saw he had tears in his eyes. "It is over," she whispered. "It is finally over." They stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding sunlight. It felt like the entire town was out there waiting for them. Margaret Sullivan, Eliza Thornton, Jake, Tom Garrett, the Reverend, and dozens more, and they were all applauding. Ruth Ann felt a blush creep up her neck. Nobody had ever applauded for her in her entire life. "A speech," somebody hollered from the crowd. Sam held up a hand. The crowd settled down. "I am not much for making speeches," he said. "Y'all know that about me, but I have got something to say." He took a breath, getting his thoughts in order. 3 months ago, a woman stepped off the stagecoach in this very town. She had traveled 2,000 miles with nothing more than a carpet bag and a little bit of hope. Most of y'all did not trust her. Some of you were just plain cruel to her. Ruth Ann could feel everyone's eyes on her. She just held her chin up high, but she stayed. She put in the work. She proved who she was every single day. Sam's voice got a little rough. "And when Crawford came after our place, when everything was on fire, she stood right there on her own 2 feet. She did not run. She did not break." He turned then and looked right at her. "Ruth Ann Brennan came to this town looking for a second chance. But what she gave me was something more. She gave me a reason to keep on fighting. She gave me hope back when I had forgotten what hope even felt like." Sam took her hand. He took it and raised it up high for all to see. "This woman is my wife. She is carrying my child. And there is nothing on this good earth I am more proud of than standing right here beside her." The crowd just roared. Ruth Ann could not hold back the tears this time. She did not even try. Eliza pushed her way through the people and gave her a powerful hug. "Welcome home, Ruth Ann, for real and for good. Thank you. Do not you thank me. You earned every bit of this." The weeks that came after were the happiest Ruth Ann had ever known. The new cabin was all finished. It was bigger than the old one, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. The neighbors had all added little things Sam never would have dreamed of. There were curtains on the windows, a braided rug by the fireplace, and a rocking chair for the nursery. Ruth Ann started crying the moment she saw that rocking chair. "Eliza made it," Sam told her quietly. "Same pattern as the one her grandmother carried all the way from Virginia. It is beautiful. So are you." Ruth Ann looked right at him. After all they had been through, those simple words could still take her breath away. "Do you really mean that?" "I mean every single word I say to you." Sam walked over to her and gently put his hands on her growing belly. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Twice. That is not nearly enough." He kissed her on the forehead. "I love you. I love you. I love you. All right. That is 5 times now. Still not enough." The pregnancy moved along. Ruth Ann grew rounder and more uncomfortable, with her back always aching and her feet always swollen. She complained about it all the time, and Sam just listened patiently. He never judged her. He just rubbed her feet every night and got up to bring her water, never once making her feel like she was a burden. "You are too good to me," she told him one evening. "I am exactly as good as you deserve." "That is not what I was getting at." "I know exactly what you meant." Sam put her foot down and gave her a serious look. "Ruth Ann, for 10 years I have just been waiting around to die, just going through the motions of living, carrying a guilt so heavy I could hardly take a breath." "Sam, let me finish." He took both of her hands in his. "You changed all of that. Not by doing anything big or special, just by being here, just by being you, by making me be real again, too. I did not make you do anything." "Oh, yes, you did. You forced me to feel again and to hope again. You made me believe that maybe I deserved to have good things in my life, too." His voice started to crack. "I spent all that time thinking God was punishing me for living when Thomas died, for not being able to save Mary and the baby, but then you showed up and I started to see things different." "What?" "That maybe God was not punishing me after all. Maybe he was just being patient, waiting until I was ready, waiting until you were ready." Sam pressed his forehead against hers. "We found each other, Ruth Ann, against every odd there is. Does that not feel like grace to you?" Ruth Ann thought about Boston, about the pantry, about the church basement, and those desperate letters, and the 2,000 miles of fear and hope. "Yes," she whispered, "it feels exactly like grace." The labor pains started 3 weeks before her time. Ruth Ann woke up in the dead of night, struggling for breath as a sharp pain tore right through her. "Sam!" He was right there beside her in a heartbeat. "What's wrong? The baby. The baby is coming. It's too soon. You go on and tell that to the baby." The color drained from Sam's face. Ruth Ann saw it happen. She saw the fear and that awful memory come flooding back into his eyes. "Sam, Sam, you look at me." He did. "This is not Mary. This is not that night. I'm going to be fine." "You can't know that for sure. I know that I am stronger than I have ever been. I know I have you. And I know Eliza is 5 miles down the road, and she has delivered half the babies in this whole valley." Ruth Ann squeezed his hand tight as another pain hit. "Now you go get her, and don't you dare fall to pieces on me." Sam gave her a hard kiss. Then he was out the door. The hours that came after were the longest of Ruth Ann's whole life. Eliza got there just before sunrise, calm as you please and knowing just what to do. She sent Jake riding into town for the doctor, though she admitted she didn't figure he'd make it in time. "This baby's coming in a hurry," she told Ruth Ann. "You're doing just fine. It hurts, I know it does, honey, I know, but you are almost there." Sam stayed right by Ruth Ann's side through the whole ordeal. He held her hand, letting her crush his fingers without a single complaint, and he wiped the sweat from her brow. "I can't do this," Ruth Ann gasped after what felt like an eternity. "Yes, you can. I can't." "Ruth Ann." Sam's voice cut right through her panic. "You look at me." She looked up. "You crossed 2,000 miles all by yourself. You survived Boston. You survived Crawford. You have survived every single thing life has thrown at you." His eyes were burning with a fire so certain. "This is just one more thing, and you are going to survive it too." "How do you know that?" "Because you are the strongest person I have ever known, and because I flat out refuse to let you go." Something inside Ruth Ann shifted then. The fear didn't just vanish, but it made some room for something else. Determination. Plain old stubbornness. It was the same fire that had carried her clear across a continent. "Okay," she said. Okay, let's do this thing." 2 hours later, their daughter was born. Eliza gently placed the baby into Ruth Ann's arms. She was tiny and perfect and screaming with a good, healthy set of lungs. "She is beautiful," Eliza said, with tears in her own eyes. "Just absolutely beautiful." Ruth Ann looked down at her daughter. This little miracle. This was proof that life could start all over again, that having hope was not a foolish thing, and that second chances were very real. Sam. He was just staring at the baby like he had never seen anything so precious in his whole life. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "She has got your hair. She has got your eyes. She is perfect. She is ours." Sam reached out a hand and touched the baby's cheek with one of his rough fingers. The baby grabbed onto it and held on tight. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father. And I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you always know just how much you are loved." Ruth Ann felt the tears just streaming down her face. Good tears, the very best kind of tears. "What should we name her?" she asked. Sam thought about it for a second. "Grace?" Grace. Because that is what she is. That is what you are. That is what this whole new life is. He looked at Ruth Ann, and his eyes were full of wonder. A grace we did not earn. A grace we did not deserve. A grace we got anyway. Grace Hartwell. Ruth Ann tried the name out. I like it. Grace it is. Then the doctor showed up, a full 2 hours too late. He checked on Ruth Ann and the baby and said they were both as healthy as could be. You're a lucky man, Hartwell, he said as he was leaving. Do not you forget it. Trust me, Sam said. I never will. The first year of Grace's life went by in a happy, exhausted blur. Ruth Ann had never put in so much hard work in her whole life, with all the feeding, changing, and comforting a baby needs, all while managing the ranch, the cooking, and the never-ending chores of Montana living. But she had also never known such happiness. Grace was a sweet baby, always cheerful and full of wonder, captivated by everything from the chickens to the sunsets to the sight of her daddy's face. Sam was just smitten with her, carrying her everywhere he went, always talking to her, and constantly dozing off with her resting on his chest. You are going to spoil that little girl, Ruth Ann told him one evening. That is my intention. She needs to get used to sleeping in her own bed. She will, in time. Sam kissed the top of Grace's fuzzy red head. But right now, she is only this little for a short while. I am not about to miss a single second of it. Ruth Ann felt like she should argue, but she just could not. Not when she felt the exact same way, deep down. The community had finally welcomed them with open arms. Margaret Sullivan would bring over a casserole every single week. Eliza would stop by just to give Ruth Ann a break. The ladies from the church got a quilting circle together and made a blanket for Grace that was so beautiful, Ruth Ann just cried when she first saw it. You belong right here, Margaret said to her one afternoon. I know I was not very kind at first, but you have proven your worth more than 10 times over. Thank you. Do not you thank me. You are the one who did all the work. I am just finally getting smart enough to see it. When Grace was 6 months old, a letter showed up all the way from Boston. Ruth Ann knew that handwriting right away. It was from Mrs. Whitmore. Her hands were shaking as she tore it open. What is it? Sam asked, watching her expression change. Ruth Ann read the letter through once, then she read it a second time, and then she just started to laugh. What? What is so funny? Charles Whitmore. Ruth Ann's voice was full of disbelief. He tried to force himself on another servant girl, but this one had a brother, a real big brother who beat Charles nearly to death. Good. That is not even the best part. Ruth Ann held the letter up for him to see. Mrs. Whitmore is writing to apologize. She says she finally believes I was telling the truth all along. She wants to clear my name. Sam's face grew hard. You mean she wants to soothe her own guilty conscience? Probably. Ruth Ann looked down at the letter, at the fancy handwriting that used to fill her with fear. But it does not matter anymore. What do you mean by that? I do not need her apology. Ruth Ann walked over to the fireplace. I do not need forgiveness from Boston. I do not need a single thing from that part of my life. She let the letter drop right into the fire. Sam watched the paper curl and burn. Are you sure about that? I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Ruth Ann turned to look at him. My life is here with you, with our Grace, on this ranch with these neighbors and this land. And if those folks back east never believe you, well, they just do not believe you. Ruth Ann shrugged her shoulders. I know what the truth is. You know what the truth is. Our daughter will grow up knowing the truth, and that is more than enough. Sam walked over to her and pulled her into a tight hug. I love you, Ruth Ann Hartwell. I love you too, even when you are spoiling our little girl. Especially when I am spoiling our little girl. From her blanket, Grace made a happy little gurgle. Ruth Ann laughed and went to scoop her up. This was her family. This was her home. This was her life. Everything else was just useless chatter. The years rolled on by. Grace went from being a baby to a toddler, and then to a little girl who had her mother's fiery red hair and her father's stubborn chin. She learned how to ride a horse before she could even read a book, could wrangle a chicken by the time she was 3, and had her daddy wrapped completely around her little finger. She is going to be trouble, Eliza predicted with a smile. She already is trouble, Ruth Ann agreed. The best kind of trouble. They had more children. A boy they named Thomas, after Sam's brother. Then a daughter they named Mary, after the wife Sam had lost so long ago. Each one of them was a blessing, each one was a reminder that life keeps moving forward, that love just grows bigger, and that a family is built as much by choice as it is by blood. The ranch did well. They grew the herd, bought up more land, and hired some hands to help with all the work. Sam's nightmares started to fade away, showing up less and less until one day they just stopped coming back at all. "I think Thomas would be mighty proud of you," Ruth Ann told him one night. "Why would you say that?" "Because you made it through. Because you built something good out of the ashes. Because you did not let that war break you for good." Sam was quiet for a long while. "I used to think that surviving was like I was betraying him, like I owed it to Thomas to be miserable forever. And now I think maybe surviving was the whole point. Maybe that is what he would have wanted for me all along." Sam looked over at her. "You taught me that. You and Grace and Thomas and Mary, you all taught me that living was not a betrayal. It was the whole reason for everything." Ruth Ann reached for his hand. "I am glad you finally see that. I am glad you were patient enough to wait for me to figure it all out." When Grace turned 18, she announced that she was leaving. "I want to see the world," she told them at the dinner table. "I want to go to school. I want to be more than just some rancher's wife." Ruth Ann felt her heart just felt her crack in two. "You are leaving us? Not for good, just for a little while." Grace took hold of her mother's hands. "You taught me to be brave, Mama. You taught me to take risks. How can I possibly do anything less than that?" Ruth Ann looked at her daughter, at this strong, beautiful girl she had raised, and in her she saw herself 30 years ago, clutching a worn-out bag and stepping out into a world she did not know. "You are right," she said. "You are absolutely right. You are not mad at me. I'm scared to death, but I am also so proud." Ruth Ann squeezed Grace's hands tight. "Go see the world. Go be something amazing. And when you are ready, you come on home. We will be right here waiting for you." Grace left on a bright, sunny morning in September. Ruth Ann stood out on the porch, watching the stagecoach get smaller and smaller until it disappeared from sight. Sam's arm was wrapped around her shoulders, and her heart was just full of both sadness and pride. "She will be just fine," Sam said in a low voice. "I know. You raised her right. We raised her right." Ruth Ann leaned her head against him. "Remember when you first found me at that stagecoach station? I was so scared and all alone, and I was sure nobody would ever want me. I remember. You changed my whole life, Sam. You gave me a chance when not another soul would. You believed me when the entire world was calling me a liar. You did the very same thing for me." Sam kissed the top of her head. "You looked at a broken man and loved him all the same. You helped me gather up the pieces. We put each other back together. That is what being partners is it not?" Sam turned her to face him directly. "That is what love is. Two folks choosing each other every single day. Through the lean times and the good times, through fires and floods and watching the children leave home. Through it all. Through it all." Ruth Ann looked at this man she had married 30 years ago. His hair was silver now. His face was etched with lines. His hands were gnarled from decades of hard labor. But his eyes were the same, clear and steady, and filled with a love that had only grown deeper with time. "You are still beautiful," he said, as if he could read her mind. "I am old. You are beautiful." Sam cupped her face. "You were beautiful the day you stepped down from that stagecoach. You were beautiful the day you told Crawford to go to hell. You were beautiful the day you gave me Grace and Thomas and Mary. Sam, you will be beautiful the day I die, and every single day in between." He smiled. "That is not just sweet talk, Ruth Ann. That is the plain and simple truth." She kissed him, a kiss that was soft and sweet, and held 30 years of a shared life. "I love you," she said. "I love you more." Everything. No, we sure did not. A week later, he pressed a new letter into her hand, an advertisement for a wife. You need a new one? She asked, her heart dropping. No, I need you to answer it, properly this time. I want you to choose this life, Ruth Ann, not just run to it. You think I would choose this? She teased. The dirt, the work, the terrible coffee. He pulled her close. I am hoping you would choose me. She smiled. That is not a fair fight. They got married a month later, with Jake Thornton and his wife as their witnesses. And in the spring, when the first green shoots pushed through the blackened earth, they started to rebuild. Sometimes, years later, Sam would catch her staring out at the fields and ask, "Still think you made the right choice?" And she would always reply, "I am still here, aren't I?" For now, he would joke. For now, she would agree. But they both knew it meant forever. It was a promise whispered every morning with the sunrise and sealed every night under a blanket of stars. And when their hair had turned to silver and their children's children were running through the tall grass, he asked her one last time, "Was it all worth it, Ruth Ann? The hardship, the struggle?" "Every single second," she said, her voice full of certainty. "But what if I had said no? What if I never answered your letter?" "Then I would have just kept putting out advertisements until you did." "That sounds impossible." "Maybe, but I would have kept on trying anyway." They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the Montana sun go down. Behind them, the house was filled with memories. The kitchen where Ruth Ann finally figured out how to cook. The bedroom where 4 babies had been born. The fireplace where Sam used to read poetry to her on cold winter nights. In front of them, the future stretched out, unknown and filled with endless possibilities. More years to spend together, more good times and bad, and more chances to keep choosing each other. "Any regrets?" Sam asked. Ruth Ann thought about it for a real long moment. She thought about Boston and the scandal that had chased her away. She thought about the desperate letter she had sent to a total stranger. She thought about the 2,000 miles of fear and hope. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had found right here. "No," she said at last. "Not a single one." "Not even about the coffee?" "Well, the coffee was awful. You got better." "I got better at a lot of things," Ruth Ann smiled. "But the very best thing I ever did was answer your advertisement. The best thing I ever did was take a chance on a broken cowboy who had sad eyes and a dream of building something real. And the best thing I ever did," he said, "was send for a woman who was brave enough to tell the truth." "What?" Sam pulled her in close. "We saved each other, Ruth Ann. We built each other up. We became a family. The best family a man could ever dream of. The sun slipped away behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Off in the distance, you could hear the cattle lowing. The evening birds started up their song. The world was settling down into the quiet rhythm of another Montana night." Ruth Ann Hartwell stood there wrapped in her husband's arms and felt whole. She had come out here looking for a second chance. What she found was a brand new life. She had found love, and family, and purpose, and a place to belong. She had found herself, and in the end, that was worth more than anything else in the world. 30 years ago, a woman carrying a beat-up old bag had stepped off a stagecoach in Copper Creek, Montana. She had been afraid all by herself and convinced that nobody would ever see what she was worth. But one man had. One man had looked at her with clear eyes and told her she was beautiful. Not because of the way she looked, but because of the person she was, because of her courage, her honesty, and her stubborn refusal to let the world's meanness decide who she was. And that single thing had made all the difference. Ruth Ann looked at Sam, her husband, her partner, her home. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For believing in me. for giving me for loving me just the way I am. You never had to thank me for that, darling. Sam planted a soft kiss on her forehead. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did in my life. A sweet smile spread across Ruth Ann's face as she let him pull her close, while the stars began to pop out one by one. She had spent her whole life with folks telling her she simply wasn't enough. She crossed half the country just to prove 'em all wrong. And bless her heart, she did it. Not by becoming some different person, not by changing the woman she was, but by finding a place where her own truth mattered more than the lies people spun. By finding a good man who saw her clear as day and loved her down to her boots. By building a life that was honest and good and all her own. Ruth Ann Brennan had shown up in Montana with nothing but shame and a whole lot of hope. Ruth Ann Hartwell would leave it one day, surrounded by pure love. Now that was a story worth telling. That was a life worth living right there. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.